The final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 4468 in the name of Claudia Beamish on Scotland's National Museum of Costume. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Would those members who wish to speak in the debate please press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. And if you are ready, Ms Beamish, I would call on you to open the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome this opportunity to lead this members' debate, and in so doing wish to place on record my thanks to the Save Our Shambelly campaign, to the members who have signed my motion, and acknowledge those representatives at a local, Scottish and UK level who have got behind this campaign. This debate strikes at the heart of our aspiration to celebrate Scotland's rich cultural history and to ensure that it can reach and connect with as many people as possible. This evening I want to talk about why I believe this closure runs counter to that aspiration. I want to talk about the interdependence of the tourism industry in Dumfries and Galloway, and I want to talk about the need to have a full and open consultation to try to reach a positive conclusion. The proposals to close the National Museum of Costume arose somewhat out of the blue in early October. National Museums Scotland have told us that their decision has been influenced by the twin financial pressures of reduced public funding and reduced income from other sources. Members in this chamber are all too aware of the financial situation we find ourselves in this country, as are so many of our constituents. We all want to know and understand why difficult decisions are made, but in this case, when it extends to organisations which rely on public money for their existence, we have a duty here to analyse what these decisions are. I do not believe, in the case of the National Museum of Scotland, that the answer to balancing their books lies in a budgetary equivalent of sacrificing a limb. Among the aims of the National Museum of Scotland is to ensure that its collections reach and connect, as I said, with as many people as possible. Part of this process, quite rightly, involves partnership working with local museums and groups across the country. While I welcome and encourage this valuable aspect of the work, it is not the whole story. Alongside the cultural value of the collection it houses, I believe that Shambelly House has a physical value as a permanent anchor for the NMS's work outside the Central Belt. Such anchors against centralisation should be encouraged and not withdrawn. Returning to the figures, we are told that the cost per visitor stands at £23 and 6p per head. This figure counts the 9,500 visitors who visit the museum itself, ignoring the further 6,250 estimated annual visitors to the shop and cafe. With those people included, many have estimated that the public subsidy comes to £13.93. As the Save Our Shambelly campaign have pointed out, recent reinvestment in the launch and relaunch in the Museum of Flight in East Lothian and the Museum of Rural Life in East Kilbride have seen visitor numbers rally. A similar approach at Shambelly could surely boost visitor numbers and income, demonstrating that the site is viable. The campaign brings together strong voices for the region's tourism sector. Dumfries and Galloway Chamber of Commerce, Destination Dumfries and Galloway, and the Association of Dumfries and Galloway Accommodation Providers. The sector brings in around £270 million a year to the local economy, directly supporting almost 6,000 jobs and a further 1,300 indirectly. All three organisations in the SOS campaign emphasise that 15,000 visitors Shambelly attracts, while it may be comparatively small relative to other museum properties, are hugely important to the region's tourism sector. These businesses and jobs do not exist in isolation. There is a strong interdependence between the visitor attractions, the markets, the cafes, the bars and the accommodation. As an example, James Wilson, a constituent who operates self-catering accommodation in Rockcliffe on the Solway coast, wrote to me to highlight his efforts to promote Dumfries and Galloway. He said, "It is absolutely vital for small businesses like ours that Dumfries and Galloway has a diverse and quality offer for culture and the arts. We have been long-term supporters of the museum at Shambelly House, and regularly bringing friends and family to visit and recommending the facility to our visitors. And Gordon Mann, today in the public gallery, the Chief Executive of the Chamber of Commerce and Chair of Destination Dumfries and Galloway, states, "Closure now, following one of the toughest tourism seasons in the region, would be a body blow to the industry, sending out all the wrong signals." Despite the impact that closure could have on the wider tourism industry in the region, the voice of those businesses that stand to be affected has not had a chance to be heard. This lack of public consultation is a key weakness in the case for closure, and I'm keen to see the National Museum Scotland revisit it. Earlier this month, I had the opportunity, along with other South Scotland members, to meet the Cabinet Secretary and enjoyed what I think was a constructive discussion on this issue. Following that meeting, those MSPs in attendance have written jointly to the board of the National Museum Scotland to add our weight to the calls from Dumfries and Galloway Council and the Chambers of Commerce for a decision to be postponed for 12 months to enable wider engagement of local communities and businesses. This would give the NMS time to reflect on the views of those who stand to be affected by these proposals, and would also give a breathing space to consider options. A wider consultation would allow for different organisational management structures to be fully explored. For example, a problem identified with Chambly House has been the lack of physical space for the full costume collection. Given the size constraints, could there not be a case for retaining the site but using it for a permanent schedule of rolling exhibitions as well? There is also opportunities to expand the use of the house as a picturesque location for private events. During our discussions, I was heartened by the acknowledgement by the Cabinet Secretary of the legitimate concerns surrounding this issue, particularly in relation to public consultation. The issue has attracted support from across this chamber, and I welcome the cross-party efforts to take this issue forward. I also welcome work done by my colleagues on the Dumfries and Galloway Council, Tom McCautry and Davy Stitt, and my Westminster colleague Russell Brown, whose web campaign has attracted support. Finally, I welcome Alex Ferguson's amendment to my motion and was pleased to add my support to that as well. Chambly is an important part of the tourism landscape in Dumfries and Galloway, and there is real support to safeguard its future. The challenge now is to turn those warm words into action. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on constituency member Alex Ferguson. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I commend Claudia Beamish warmly for both tabling the motion before us this evening and indeed for prevailing upon her business managers to ensure that it came before Parliament timorously. It was important that it did so, I believe, and I'm delighted to take part in the debate this evening as a constituency member for Galloway and West Dumfries, within which Chambly House lies. BBC's South of Scotland website today headlines the fact that this debate is taking place this evening. And in doing so, it points out that the proposal to close Chambly has, and I quote, provided cross-party concern about the possibility of closure and its potential impact on the economy of Dumfries and Galloway. And I want to spend the brief time available to me looking at both halves of that sentence, Presiding Officer. Firstly, it has provoked cross-party concern. Now, Claudia Beamish mentioned this, and I think she was right to do so, but I cannot emphasise how true that is. From the word go, back at the beginning of October, the degree of cross-party support amongst MSPs has been quite remarkable for both its consistency and its strength on this issue, to the extent that, having met individually with the Director Gordon Rintoul, most of us, 5 of us then met jointly, as Claudia Beamish pointed out, with the Cabinet Secretary, following which we all jointly signed a letter which was sent individually to each trustee of NMS in advance of their meeting next week. And I hope that the degree of inter- and cross-party cooperation does not go unnoticed by those who are responsible for taking this decision. And it doesn't just stop with us MSPs, as are highlighted in the amendment to Claudia Beamish's motion. To a man and a woman, Dumfries and Galloway Council, the Chamber of Commerce, Visit Scotland and other stakeholders such as ADGAP are totally united in asking NMS to think again. Not, I emphasise, to immediately reverse its proposal, because we do recognise the very great pressures that NMS is under, like other organisations, but to give us all a breathing space, a period of grace, if you will, within which we can look sensibly at the many alternative management models that could, not necessarily would, but certainly could, point the way towards a sustainable future for Shambally House. Presiding Officer, if you weren't already acquainted with Dumfries and Galloway, you might ask, why do we need a future for what is basically an old house that only employs a few people and which closes every winter anyway? And that brings me to the second part of the BBC sentence, and it's one that Claudia Beamish quite rightly highlighted. Presiding Officer, the impact on the local economy of Dumfries and Galloway. And that local economy, as any one of us who live and know that part of the world, it's a very, very fragile one, within which each small enterprise tends to feed off the others. You close one, you will instantly have a major detrimental impact on the others. And like Claudia Beamish, I've had many emails from constituents who are enormously concerned about the impact that closing Shambally would have on their own fragile enterprises. We live in an age of consultation, Presiding Officer, and it is NMS's, frankly, failure to undertake any local open consultation process before announcing this closure that has caused the most concern, I think, to all of us, and certainly to the local stakeholders. And that needs to be put right. And it can be. And it can be put right by ensuring that we're given time, a year, I would suggest, to explore the very real options that do exist for partnership working, for innovative thinking, for radical solutions that could ensure a future for Shambally. Thus far, we have been denied the opportunity to do so. It cannot be right that the NMS facilities become just an asset of the Central Belt, facilities of which one I cannot help but point out and notice that the flagship here in the heart of Edinburgh is absolutely free for all those who wish to enter. We have just one request, Presiding Officer. In closing, give us some more time to take a long, hard look at this. If Shambally House has to close, so be it, but it should not do so before all interested parties have an opportunity to explore every last prospect of keeping it up and running. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Aileen MacLeod to be followed by Dr. Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I too would like to begin by congratulating Claudia Beamish on securing this evening's debate. And I welcome the degree of cross-party consensus that's been shown on this issue and the willingness to work together across the Chamber to resolve it. Partnership working is, in my opinion, the solution to this situation. I'd also like to thank the Cabinet Secretary for meeting with South of Scotland members the other week and writing to the Board of National Museums Scotland to make them aware of our concerns and the partnership approach that's been called for by the delegation that met recently with NMS from the Dumfries and Galloway Council and the Chamber of Commerce. Now, as members have already said, Shambally is important both as a part of the national collections and as a visitor attraction in Dumfries and Galloway in its own right. And Presiding Officer, we all understand the present financial pressures affecting every public body, but it's precisely these hard times that make the sort of partnership approach essential. We need to look at why Shambally is so little known, what more it could offer and how it could be promoted. And if we can help Shambally to survive in hard times, it will surely thrive and flourish as our economy strengthens and returns to growth. Presiding Officer, as a region, Dumfries and Galloway is accustomed to enticing people to make the relatively lengthy journey to see what it has to offer. The region also has experience of holding seasonal exhibitions of national significance, such as the justly praised Money exhibition held in Kirkcudbright in July and August of 2005. That exhibition attracted 60,000 visitors in 2 months, 4 times the visitors that Shambally attracted in its entire season last year. With the right material and support, Dumfries and Galloway Council and an organising committee of volunteers pulled off an exhibition of major significance that exceeded everyone's expectations. And not only that, Kirkcudbright has hosted high-profile exhibitions every year since 2000, and the local organising committee, Kirkcudbright 2000, has the support of the National Galleries of Scotland in doing that. Kirkcudbright has in particular hosted successful exhibitions covering the work of the Glasgow girls and Glasgow boys, many of whom had links with Kirkcudbright and drew inspiration from the town and its surroundings. Presiding Officer, there is no doubt in my mind, therefore, that Dumfries and Galloway can deliver when the Kirkcudbright experience demonstrates that there is a capacity in Dumfries and Galloway for succeeding at this sort of enterprise, and that's why I support the efforts of Dumfries and Galloway Council, the Chamber of Commerce, the Association of Accommodation Providers and Destination Dumfries and Galloway to work with the National Museum Scotland and find a suitable future for Shambally. Now, I believe that we can boost Chambly's profile locally and nationally, thereby increasing visitor numbers and income. And we could use Chambly for many of the NMS's activities in the region in terms of loans and visiting exhibitions, as well as maintaining its role as Scotland's National Museum of Costume. And we could also use it as a venue for events in the same way that other national museums are. What is required is the innovation and drive that people in Dumfries and Galloway might like to wear lightly, but which resulted in those 60,000 visitors to Kirkcudbright Town Hall over 2 months in 2005. For it to happen, however, the NMS need to get round the table with the Council and the other local bodies I've referred to, and to do the work that we require to take forward this vision and make it a reality. Presiding Officer, NMS has a serious offer from local players who genuinely want to help, even when their own budgets are under real pressure. And not only that, they are local players with a track record in overcoming distance and obscurity and netting visitor numbers anyone could envy. Presiding Officer, I also wrote recently to the Cabinet Secretary about the ownership issue of Chambly House itself, and in her reply, the Cabinet Secretary stated that the house is under the property of Scottish ministers, and should NMS decide to close this museum, it will become the responsibility of the Scottish Government to maintain and keep secure. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, while a decision on Chambly is for the trustees of National Museum Scotland to make, I do hope that they will enter into a real partnership working with Dumfries and Galloway and give us a time to consider the options, not just to save Chambly, but to enhance and improve it for the future.
Many thanks. Now call on Elaine Murray to be followed by Jim Hume.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too congratulate Claudia Beamish in securing this debate on an issue of considerable importance to Dumfries and Galloway, and I also express my support for Alex Ferguson's amendment. Now, Chambly is not in my constituency. However, I was surprised that the first I learned of plans to close the Museum of Costume at the end of the season on the 31st of October was when I received an email earlier that month from one of the 9 members of staff there who is to be made redundant. I was shocked to learn of the imminent closure of this important visitor attraction in Dumfries and Galloway in this way, and with so little notice. Other members of the community, Claudia Beamish has mentioned many, including Dumfries and Galloway Chamber of Commerce, were equally taken aback by the short notice and the lack of consultation with anyone outside the board of NMS. Now, NMS have provided a list of reasons why they have taken this decision. However, neither the board nor the director has seen fit to ask local people what the museum means to them or for their views on how visitor numbers might be increased. My colleague, Councillor Tom McCaultrey, one of the representatives of the Abbey Ward on Dumfries and Galloway Council, in which Chambly resides, has suggested, for example, introducing a day ticket giving admission to 3 attractions in the area, Chambly, the Cornmill and Sweetheart Abbey, and that could boost visitor numbers to all 3 attractions. But there has been no attempt, it seems, to seek innovative solutions. Claudia Beamish has already demonstrated that the cost per visitor to Chambly is not very different to other NMS facilities as a whole, and indeed Chambly costs less than 1% of the total budget of NMS. In that case, why pick on Dumfries and Galloway? The importance of tourism to Scotland has been demonstrated this very week by 2 government-led debates on tourism, and tourism is especially important to rural areas like ours. We have a terrific tourism offering in Dumfries and Galloway: landscape, food, culture, heritage. Why close that part of the NMS collection which is situated in our area? Instead of applying a creative approach to identify how the facility might be promoted and expanded, we are hearing a number of excellent suggestions in this debate tonight, and I'm sure more are to come. But the approach of NMS has simply been to cut without consultation with staff, to cut without consultation with the local community, or with local tourism operators and businesses. I ask, would they have done this if Chambly was situated in the Central Belt or even the Highlands rather than in Dumfries and Galloway? Well, we in Dumfries and Galloway suspect not. I know ministers say, and it is true, that this is an operational matter for NMS and that they cannot intervene. But NMS will receive almost £21 million in revenue and capital support from the Scottish Government this year. Now, we've recently seen the chairman of a further education college resign under pressure from a Scottish Government minister. I'm not asking the Cultural Secretary, to exert any type of pressure of that nature, but I wonder if you could maybe exert a little pressure just to try and persuade the board of NMS to think again, to preserve Chambly at least for the 12 months as suggested by Dumfries and Galloway, to preserve the jobs that it supports, and to work to canvass fresh and innovative ideas for a sustainable future.
Many thanks. I now call on Jim Hume to be followed by Joan McAlpine.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First, begin, of course, by congratulating Claudia Beamish on securing this evening's debate. While situated in a rural corner of Scotland, the National Museum of Costume is undoubtedly of national cultural importance and therefore deserves to have a platform in this chamber. The threat of closure which hangs over Shambelly House has been one of the instances when party differences have been cast aside in favour of a united front by parliamentarians throughout South Scotland. Cross-party meetings with National Museum Scotland officials, Mr Rintoul included, and the Culture Secretary, and co-authored letters represent the depth of feeling that exists over the proposal to close Shambelly. The justification I have routinely heard in favour of this proposal is that there are low visitation numbers, high operational spend per visitor and reduced public funding. Yet there is little mention of just how important the siting of a national museum is to the small surrounding communities of Lochfoot, Glencaple and, of course, Newabbey, which has a population of less than 100 people. If you remove the National Museum of Costume from such an area, you remove a crucial element from those communities. The sparsity of population spread in Dumfries and Galloway means that leisure and tourist pursuits in the region are largely interconnected. For example, a visit to Shambelly House for a tourist may also coincide with a visit to the artist town of Kirkcudbright and the book town of Wigtown. I fear the closure of Shambelly may impact upon other cultural pursuits in Dumfries and Galloway, whilst also impacting upon local businesses in Newabbey that rely on visitors to the village. Coming just over a year after the National Museum of Scotland completed the £47 million refurbishment of its flagship museum in Edinburgh, there is understandable concern among many constituents of a centralist agenda amongst officials at the National Museum. Indeed, this is reinforced by figures which suggest that spending on Shambelly represents just 0.68% of National Museum Scotland's annual budget, and only an additional 44 pence per visitor is spent on Shambelly visitors when compared against the average from visitors to other facilities. This does little to dissuade those from thinking that Dumfries and Galloway is being neglected. I've met twice with NMS officials and can fully appreciate that in an age of reduced public funding, various difficult decisions will need to be made. This should not be one of them. I do not believe that dangling the carrot of roving exhibitions throughout the region will prove to be a sufficient replacement for a museum which has been anchored in the area for 30 years. It's an intriguing prospect, but not one which should come at the expense of Shambelly, and not one where there is little detail to consider. A point I have put to Dr Rintoul during my discussions is whether NMS has fully explored all venues. If visitor numbers are too low, then how do we boost them? Is Shambelly House being marketed in the correct fashion? If costs per visitor are indeed too high, then there are not ways to tackle this without the drastic choice of a full closure. These are all questions which need answered and are worthy of further exploration. And all the more reason why I support Dumfries and Galloway Council's calls for at least a 12-month stay of execution. The Dumfries and Galloway Chamber of Commerce and Gordon Mann in particular deserve great credit for sustaining their Save Our Shambelly campaign and keeping us parliamentarians regularly updated. This has been an excellent and passionate debate with notable contributions from all members, and more to come, I'm sure. The Cabinet Secretary can surely be left in no doubt as to the value of the National Museum of Costume to Dumfries and Galloway, and must now, of course, work with NMS officials and all to ensure that this museum is retained.
Thanks very much. Now call on Joan McAlpine to be followed by Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would also like to add my congratulations to Claudia Beamish for securing tonight's debate and echo my colleague Aileen MacLeod's sentiments and those expressed by others across the Chamber that it's important to demonstrate a willingness for all parties to work together to resolve this issue. I'd also like to add my thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for recognising the importance of Shambelly House to the South West region by chairing the meeting already mentioned that brought together elected members and representatives of the management of National Museums Scotland. I note too the strongly worded letter that the Cabinet Secretary sent to the Museum Board of Trustees conveying our local concerns. Of course, the Cabinet Secretary cannot and should not directly intervene in operational decisions, and I know that only too well, as I sat on the committee that scrutinised the recent National Library Bill, and opposition members during that committee rightly made it very clear that they didn't want ministers now or in the distant future to have any say at all in matters which could be perceived as even remotely curatorial. That said, I was very pleased that the Cabinet Secretary acknowledged the strength of local feeling at that meeting, and I was pleased to hear her tell the meeting that National Museums Scotland should come up with a better offer for Dumfries and Galloway. I would like, if I may, to focus on what that better offer might be. Charles Stewart inherited Chambly House from his father in 1962. Charles had by that time collected more than 6,000 costume pieces spanning 3 decades. Fearing that the large Victorian house would be expensive to maintain and that his treasured collection would be dispersed after his death, Stewart concluded that by offering his house and collection to the then Royal Scottish Museum, he could save both. He did that successfully, but as we have heard, in recent years, visitor numbers to Chambly have not been as high as they could be. That said, static collections can suffer from declining numbers, and we need to keep changing the offering in our museums and galleries to keep up the public's interest. And that's something we could explore during the stay of execution that has been suggested. If I could make a small suggestion of my own, we know we already have a famous brand in National Museums Scotland. Following the relaunch of the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh last summer, a series of interviews across Scotland showed that the overall awareness of National Museums Scotland had risen substantially from 59% to 78% of the adult population. It's a great brand, and what great brands do is open satellites. We've seen that in the Bilbao Guggenheim, in the Pompidou Metz, in the Tates of Liverpool and St Ives, in the Louvre that are coming to the northern French town of Lens, and also to Abu Dhabi. And of course the V&A, the world's leading museum of art and design, will soon come to Dundee. As other members have suggested, Chambly could be the hub for visiting exhibitions in the region. A satellite would be a nice idea, and that's why I'm putting it forward. I'm aware that we do live in constrained times, but I think a year's grace would give us the opportunity to explore all sorts of options. Our national collections are precious and say much about Scotland as a country and a culture. And that is a story that needs to be told in every corner of our nation. National Museums Scotland state that their prime purpose is to hold the national collections which they manage and trust to the people of Scotland in perpetuity, and to enable access to them for as large and as broad an audience as possible. Closing the National Museum of Costume in New Abbey flies in the face of enabling access for as broad an audience as possible. National Museums Scotland claim that they operate on the basis of 4 main values: being creative by using innovation and thriving in good ideas, being generous, being collaborative and being forward-thinking. Well, I say to them, prove it. National Museums Scotland have plenty of innovative ideas thrown at them, both tonight and in the discussions with local MSPs, Dumfries and Galloway Council, the Chamber of Commerce and the Association of Accommodation Providers, and of course, Destination Dumfries and Galloway. So I would like to conclude by echoing the Cabinet Secretary's call and putting out a strong message to National Museums Scotland to come up with a better offer for Dumfries and Galloway. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Now call on Patricia Ferguson, after which we'll move to the closing speech from the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and may I also congratulate Claudia Beamish on securing this debate and recognise the MSPs who represent constituencies in the south of Scotland and the list members for the region who have worked so cooperatively in support of the Museum of Costume. Can I also congratulate my friend and colleague Russell Brown MP for his hard work in that regard, as well as the local councillors for the area who I know cared very deeply about this issue. To me, Chambly House, the Museum of Flight and the Museum of Rural Life are as important to our understanding of our culture and our history as the National Museum buildings located here in Edinburgh. Indeed, one could argue that to be truly national and to do justice to its name, our National Museum requires to have collections distributed throughout the country.
Museums and galleries can be as important to our tourism offering as scenery and weather. In fact, with weather as varied as ours, many tourists plan their holidays around the wet weather option that a museum or gallery can enjoyably be. So Shambley House has great potential. The building itself is interesting, and the gardens and grounds are also an attraction, and the cafe is a welcome oasis. Now, perhaps, as we've heard, it needs some help to realise its full potential by making better use of marketing. The collection, or at least that part of it which is available to view, is a must for anyone with an interest in clothes and accessories or in the social history of our country. And the staff have been creative and imaginative in the way they have organised their exhibits in a small space. But as we've also heard this evening, it is a fairly static exhibit. And I realise that visitor numbers are relatively low, but relative is perhaps the operative word in an area of the country that is working very hard to promote its appeal as a tourism destination. Now, I don't blame NMS for the situation Shambelli House now faces. Yes, perhaps they could have consulted better and perhaps been less precipitate in taking forward their plans, but they are reacting to the funding situation they face. But I would, in this debate, simply want to suggest that a little more creativity and thought should be put into NMS's plans. Could they, for example, think about using the winter season to host exhibitions of some of their other treasures, or perhaps work with their colleagues in the other national collections to use Chambly as a venue for ready-made exhibitions that have perhaps previously been available in Edinburgh? And Aileen MacLeod was quite right to mention the Monet exhibition and the Glasgow Girls and Glasgow Boys exhibitions that took place in previous years. Those were exhibitions that had already appeared in Glasgow and were literally taken off the shelf. Taking an exhibition off the shelf is not such an easy thing to do and involves quite a lot of time, effort and money, but it can be done, and as we've heard, with great success. I'm conscious too, Presiding Officer, that Paxton House, the family home of our former colleague John Hume Robertson, also houses a magnificent collection of 18th century men's costumes, thought to have been worn at the court of Frederick the Great by Patrick Hume. Could Paxton and Shambelli work together to complement each other's collections, linking East and West? Perhaps that's another idea that could be considered. It seems to me that a year's stay of execution is a sensible suggestion from the colleagues I've heard tonight. And I very much hope that NMS, I've never been able to get that one, NMS can be assisted to find a way to preserve Shambelli House, not just for Dumfries and Galloway, important though it is, but for the rest of the country too.
Well done. Thank you very much. Now call on the Cabinet Secretary, Fiona Hislop, to close the debate on behalf of the Government, please. 7 minutes.
Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank members for their contributions. It has been most helpful and interesting to hear the comments of members on the issue, and indeed the strong views which I know are held in Dumfries and Galloway. And I heard the views first-hand from local MSPs when I convened the meeting with them on the 7th of November. As has already been acknowledged, the potential closure of the Museum of Costume is an operational decision for the National Museums of Scotland Board of Trustees, which members will be aware operates at arm's length from ministers. But as Claudia Beamish, who secured the debate, will acknowledge, this debate is timely because, as members may be aware, the Board of NMS next meets on the 23rd of November, and I would reiterate that no final decision has been made. I am very much aware that there is strong feeling and a strong cross-party support for this campaign, and Alex Ferguson made those points in his contribution, and the importance about maintaining, also I understand, there's a recognition that we have to maintain the operational independence of our national collections, a point well made by Joe McAlpine. I also appreciate that there is a good deal of concern about the potential closure of the Museum of Costume, and that is why I welcome the discussions that the National Museum have held with local members also. We were also able to discuss the challenges of the continued operation of the museum and what other options might be for access to the national collections in Dumfries and Galloway. And I also appreciate the cross-party and constructive nature of the discussions that we're having and that I've had with local members. And I did write to the NMS board to make them aware of MSP's views. But I think the key question is, how do we get more than 10,000 paying visitors into the Dumfries and Galloway area? And I think Joe McAlpine was right to identify what better offer can we provide to Dumfries and Galloway, and how can we work collectively to secure that. I should also let members know that I met with the Chair and the Director of National Museums on the 14th of November to hear from them directly their views about the future of the Museum of Costume and National Museums activity in the area. And I know from my meeting with them that the Board is taking the public responses to the proposed closure seriously and looking actively at alternative activity in the area. I'll also be sending the NMS Board the official report of this debate as further input to their deliberations. The National Museum has operated the site at Shambelly for 30 years. I know from discussions with them that they have taken a strong commitment to providing access to national collections across Scotland. And whatever the final decision on the Museum of Costume, the National Museums Board have emphasised their continuing commitment to supporting activities in Dumfries and Galloway. But from this debate, we are saying there needs to be an increased and improved offer in terms of their activity. And of course, the Scottish Government is committed to investing in Dumfries and Galloway. I think Elaine Murray is slightly off the mark in questioning that commitment. £100,000 most recently to the Dark Sky Observatory. The Winter Festivals funding, we're supporting the Big Burn Supper in Dumfries. Creative Scotland, Historic Scotland, Events Scotland all continue to support development in the region. Indeed, Creative Scotland has provided £2.2 million since 2010 to projects and organisations and individuals in Dumfries and Galloway. Members may also know that I was instrumental in the saving of the Crichton campus, and I was Education Secretary when £27 million was allocated to the new Dumfries Galloway College and Library. So I am personally committed to support for Dumfries and Galloway as well. The National Museums have been clear with me that the cost of operating the Museum of Shambly is a real challenge for them. I understand the income from visitors to the site covers less than 10% of the operating cost of the site. As a result, it requires a much higher level of subsidy per visitor than any other of the museum sites. In this tough financial climate, with deep cuts in public spending imposed by the UK Government, the Scottish Government has, as far as possible, protected funding for arts and culture. I have been keen to protect the National Museum's own grant from the Scottish Government against significant cuts in the current spending review, and the grant for this financial year has been protected from any cuts, and the National Museums will receive a 0.5% core grant reduction 13-14. So that, again, is a much better position than other organisations in the sector. And I do recognise, however, the challenging general financial climate that the National Museum faces. Rising costs in utility bills, for example, for the large estate. As with all public bodies, they've rightly been implementing the living wage for lower paid members of staff. We've got a rising core cost base, and lower public income means that the National Museums, like most public bodies, need to increase income from other sources and to look seriously at how it lives within its means. However, I do think in terms of Shambly House there are constraints. The building has small rooms. We know there's only been 2 weddings in 7 years, despite marketing and other publicity drives that they've had. And I'll take an intervention in a minute. And I do think that Patricia Ferguson is absolutely right that we should be looking at creative solutions. I would caution, however, winter opening would actually compound the subsidy that might be required in terms of the overall point. But I think she made some very good suggestions, which I know the board will be able to examine when I give them a copy of the report.
Alex Ferguson.
I'm grateful to Cabinet Secretary for taking an intervention. I would suggest very gently that if they only had 2 weddings after 5 years of promotions, they perhaps could have promoted the possibility a little bit better. But I did ask the Cabinet Secretary at question time today whether she would welcome an extension in time to give us time to talk about the radical solutions that we've all referred to today. Can I ask her to take this opportunity? Would she welcome that? That doesn't ask her to intervene on the decision-making process of NMS. Would she welcome that? Because I think it would be helpful if she would.
A greater opportunity, and that would involve time for consultation on a better offer for Dumfries and Galloway. I'm not going to tie the hands of the NMS board as to what time frame that might be, because quite clearly in terms of, as we discussed at our meeting, the key period is going to be the April opening on what would be anticipated as the normal April opening. So in terms of the opportunity for time and consultation, I would welcome that, but I will leave it to the board in terms of their decision making as to what that might be and whether that is the case. And remember, the board meeting is only in a few days' time. I do recognise the concern about the potential impact of closing the museum on the local tourist industry. And while 10,000 paying visitors, 5,000 to the cafe, is a small percentage of the total visitor numbers to the National Museum sites, as many members have said, and certainly lower than other key tourism sites generally in Dumfries and Galloway, I do recognise the importance to the very local area. I'd also strongly encourage all local parties to work together with NMS to look at alternative solutions. I think Jo McAlpine and her contribution and her idea of an NMS gallery, for example, which is on a more wider perspective than just costumes, is actually a very good one that's worth looking at. It's important that we do strengthen the cultural tourism offer in Dumfries and Galloway and provide access to the national collections, and that's important that we do that. The National Museum's Director, Dr Rintoul, is inviting council representatives to meet with him at Chambly House next month with a view to discussing the potential for developing a partnership to provide greater access to the national collections and through other means, and I'm sure he will report on that. And finally, Presiding Officer, there is the question of the House itself. As Aileen MacLeod quite rightly pointed out in my reply to her, the House is the property of Scottish ministers, and should the National Museums decide to close the Museum of Costume, Chambly House will become the responsibility of the Scottish Government to maintain and keep secure. In that case, I would be absolutely open to considering suitable proposals for the use of the site from the local community or the wider Dumfries and Galloway region, obviously within public finance rules. Presiding Officer, thank you very much, I think, for the opportunity to have this debate, the opportunity for me to set out the Scottish Government position. The final decision about the future of the museum rests with the National Museums. However, I know that they remain committed to exploring options to improve access to their collections from the people of Dumfries and Galloway, and I will continue to be happy to facilitate and take part in those discussions. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now close this meeting of Parliament.